Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will begin shortly. It will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the conversation to respond to the questions you post. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed on Friday to all who registered. And we are also live streaming this session on our Facebook page. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Finally, before we start, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars, including sessions in our regular 3 p.m. Eastern time slot and frequent sessions in this earlier 12:30 time slot as well. These sessions continue our focus on reducing learning loss and accelerating equitable learning recovery. Later today, we will continue the conversation about trauma-informed practices. Later this afternoon in a session co-sponsored by Education Week and the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, with this session exploring how trauma-informed practices provide a foundation for the construction of the deep reading brain from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Please note the session will be hosted on EdWeek's On24 platform and not Zoom. Next week, we will have another doubleheader with a Crucible of Practice Salon featuring the Reading Success by 4th grade campaign in Springfield, Massachusetts. Later that afternoon, our partners at Public Broadcasting Service will co-sponsor a session featuring several member stations that are working in partnership with state and local education leaders to support learning in the classroom and at home. The following week, we will host another Funder to Funder conversation with Overdeck Family Foundation, lifting up high dosage tutoring programs as a strategy to advance equitable learning recovery at 12:30 Eastern Time, followed by a session exploring strategies for addressing teacher staffing challenges. Registration links for these upcoming sessions, are posted in the chat box. Joining you now is Sarah Torian, a senior consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's Funder to Funder conversation. Pandemics, fires, floods, and more. Philanthropy responds to disasters amidst disasters. As many of you probably know, we typically host our Funder to Funder conversations on the 3rd Tuesday of the month, and this is obviously the first Tuesday. So just wanted to share that we scheduled this special Funder to Funder conversation in response to what we were hearing from many in our network. Basically, a sense of emotional exhaustion after 18 months of responding to the many daunting challenges posed by the pandemic. This spring, as vaccination rates climbed and case numbers fell, I think many of us, myself included, were looking towards this fall and the new school year with a renewed sense of optimism, thinking that we could begin the transition from disaster response to disaster recovery, focusing on supporting kids in equitable learning recovery and getting back on track. The Delta variant obviously upended much of that sense of optimism, with many schools and communities seeing increasing COVID case numbers this fall, and many schools actually being forced to transition back to remote learning, while also facing incredible division and disagreement about how best to respond to the pandemic. At the same time, many communities across the country are dealing with an array of natural disasters. We've got flooding in areas to the east, drought and wildfires to the west, and hurricanes to the south. And these disasters, amidst disasters, affect all facets of our society. They pose particular challenges and traumas for vulnerable kids, families, and communities. So we scheduled this special session with the goal of providing some space and a place for reflection and debrief among many of the funders and practitioners who are seeking to respond to these challenges, and also to lift up and share some trauma-informed resources and insights that could inform them in their efforts. And so to begin that conversation, I am delighted to welcome and introduce our panel for today. First, I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Miriam Shark, who will moderate today's conversation. Miriam serves as a senior consultant to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, bringing her insights and expertise gained from 25 years of leadership at the Annie EKC Foundation, as well as an independent consultant working with a range of different nonprofits and foundations. Before I pass the mic to Miriam, I'd like to go ahead and also welcome our other panelists for today. Our two lead presenters are Ann Kubish and Sally Ray. Ann has served as president of the Ford Family Foundation in Oregon since 2013, having previously worked at the Aspen Institute, where she founded and led the Aspen Roundtable on Community Change. Welcome, Ann. Also happy to welcome and introduce Sally, who serves as Director of Domestic Funds at the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, bringing more than 28 years of experience working in the nonprofit world, and particular expertise, obviously, around disaster response. I'd also like to welcome Katrina Gay. Katrina serves as the Chief Development Office at NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, having served in a variety of roles at NAMI for more than 20 years. She's also compiled a number of resources and information to help those of you joining in today in your efforts to respond to the current challenges with trauma-informed practices and approaches. So thanks for that, and welcome, Katrina. Also happy to welcome Laura Isurdia. Laura serves as the field coordinator at the Ford Family Foundation, having previously served in a number of leadership and community building roles. She also serves on the school board for her local school district, so brings that insight and expertise as well. And then finally, I'd like to welcome Jim White. Jim serves as the executive director of the Nonprofit Association of Oregon, bringing more than 25 years of leadership experience in both domestic and international nonprofits, including roles with Mercy Corps and the American Red Cross. So welcome to all of you. Thank you all for joining us today. I know that you and your organizations are all dealing with disasters that are the focus of today's conversation. So we especially appreciate your taking the time to plan this conversation and share your insights today. So now I'll pass it over to you, Miriam.
Thanks, Sarah, and hello to everyone. And I'm really so happy to be here with these esteemed panelists. As many people know, I'm usually allergic to being on camera, but I made an exception for this topic. I think we've all been having similar conversations with friends and colleagues and family members about, feeling this whiplash effect, feeling like Mother Nature has been piling on, having had to pivot maybe one too many times, stepping up, stretching to sometimes beyond our breaking point. So I was really pleased that we'd have a chance to spend some time really talking about this. I think we're all hungry too, and thinking about how we respond, and to do so with some really thoughtful panelists. So I'm going to ask a few questions, but mostly I'm going to sit back and listen. But before we get into actions and solutions, Sally and Ann, let's just talk about what it's like. Disaster response, unfortunately, is not new to either one of you. So I'm especially interested in your reflections on what your staff, your grantees, your communities, and you yourself are experiencing right now. Let's start with you, Ann. Give us some of your thoughts.
Thanks, Miriam. Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I really want to thank the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for holding this session, because I think we all feel this need. There's no roadmap for this one. And so we're all learning as we go, and we really need the mutual support. So thanks for organizing this. So I'm speaking from rural Oregon, from a foundation that works in rural Oregon and Northern California. And for us, we've had COVID. We also, last year, 2020, we had the worst wildfire season in Oregon's history. So they're called the Labor Day fires. We just had the first anniversary from that. We've had political polarization over Black Lives Matter, especially in our urban areas, and in rural areas, political polarization over the COVID vaccine, masking requirements, and the national election. So what's really hard, I think, that most of us on this webinar would care about is it's the most disadvantaged always who are hurt the most by these kinds of crises. Those who have the least capacity to withstand the shocks, the fewest resources to cope and respond and recover. And as foundations, that's clearly what we care about. So you asked about our staff, our grantees, our communities, and me. So first of all, let me talk about our staff. We are a very on-the-ground foundation. Our staff live and work in the communities that we care about. We have 6 field-based staff across the state, and then the rest of us live in Roseburg, a small town in Southwest Oregon. So our staff are feeling the effects directly and personally, whether they're parents of kids who have to deal with remote education or elderly relatives to care about, or living pretty close to the fire. I will never forget the picture that one of our field-based staff sent me of the fire just down the road from her, and she didn't know whether the fire was going to take out her house or not. So everybody's living on edge themselves, and then they're trying to help their communities deal with their effects, and that's sort of nonstop. And as you said, Miriam, it's new and different things all the time. People have to pivot quickly. You know, with COVID, we quickly pivoted, and we sent $10,000 checks to 200 of our grantees, $2 million out the door right away, saying do whatever you have to do to help your communities. With the fires, again, we're right there. We have a staff member assigned to each of the fire sites, visiting the communities, helping right away, bringing gift cards to families needing emergency supplies, and now consulting and working directly with them even a year later. And you'll hear from my fabulous colleague, Laura Ciordia, about that in a few minutes. But what I'd say about our staff is that they're feeling the trauma of the communities. And I think I now understand what secondary trauma really is. And I have a bunch of empaths on our staff who are feeling the hurt of the people that they care about so deeply. Meanwhile, there's the grantees. And I think somebody used the word exhaustion. Yep, coping with one new challenge after another. And as Sarah said, we had this moment of euphoria in the spring when we were all getting vaccinated, but now we realize we're going to be living with this COVID for a long time. And I think it's especially hard for the grantees who are helping kids, those who are in the child care field, in the early child development field, the schools, the educators who are just like being, back there, just being whiplashed or whipsawed or whatever. I think that was the word that somebody used. And then I think our grantees are also sort of having trouble dealing with the systems level issues that they have to deal with, like especially the communities who are dealing with the wildfires. The public sector emergency response system is so hard to navigate, and our communities are trying to figure that out. They need coordination and convening and so on. And so it's really hard. And then at the community level, I'd say I'd focus on the political polarization, which has really been sort of gotten worse recently. And I'll just give you one story. Our largest childcare provider in our town of Roseburg in Southwest Oregon, which has 190 slots, including for infants and toddlers, closed their doors last week, September 30th, rather than adhere to our governor's masking mandate because they felt that it violated their civil and biblical convictions. That's what their letter to their client said. So it seems like in this context, it seems like people are hanging on to whatever they can control, even if it's not positive, even if it's destructive. And patience and grace are just kind of wearing thin. And I have to say that I have never been in so many meetings where people cry. I mean, everybody is just so fragile and so fried. And as for me, I'm not going to complain. I actually am so privileged, but I will say that I've never felt the weight of being a leader of an organization so heavily. I'm sort of the chief culture officer of our organization, and I have to take care of the staff who are hurting.
Thanks, Anne. I knew we came to some of the right people to get us started on this. Sally, what are your reflections on what you're seeing and experiencing now?
Well, we started our CDP COVID-19 response fund in March of 2020. And since then, we've granted more than $30 million to organizations across the world. When we first started this process, we did rapid response grant making, hoping that getting funds out the door really quickly and working on the ground would help kind of mitigate that long-term recovery process, which is really, at Center for Disaster Philanthropy, mid to long-term recovery is really our niche. I think if you had asked March 2020 me if I thought I would still be awarding grants that are addressing some of the exact same issues that I was back then, I would never have believed you. But here we are. I just awarded grants in our 11th round of funding, and a bulk of those grants went to support recovery from the trauma that's been caused by this prolonged pandemic on marginalized populations. That's just the truth. At CDP, we've been granting to support holistic recovery from disasters for years, and that's always meant funding to support mental health and behavioral health. We know that mental health funding is always lacking and always needed. I think the pandemic, though, has shown kind of a light on this for all of us, not just at CDP, but for philanthropists across the world, because we've all felt it ourselves, because we've all experienced it ourselves. CDP as an employer has been great about finding ways to be supportive of our staff. I mean, we deal in disasters, y'all. I'm from Texas, sorry about the y'all. We deal in it every day. It's we understand the trauma of disasters, but when you deal with it every day and then you have the intersection of disaster upon disaster, that becomes a little trying for a staff. And we are empaths as well, Anne, and that's tough for us to manage. But they've been great. They've awarded us some extra days off. They provided us with a mental health first aid training, which was critical for us to really understand and identify the struggles we ourselves were having, but also to understand and witness it in those we love and in those that we deal with every day, to be able to identify those signs to make sure that we respond appropriately. And they've given us little gifts of self-care to kind of nudge us to remember to put ourselves first. They've even hosted virtual yoga classes for us, which have helped us, really understand and be within ourselves during the day. Virtual, but still very critical. But I see the effects of the pandemic has had on others. And just as we've seen a light at the end of that tunnel, another surge, more misinformation, it's become really, really difficult for us. And I'm not sure we have all the answers.
Thanks, Sally. Anne and Sally, you've both really opened up a lot of topics. You've both referenced being exhausted, that your staff is exhausted, your families, your close-in partners, your communities. And you've noted that giving up isn't an option. And you've referenced, and I think you ended your comments by referencing the challenges of being a leader, the challenges of a leadership for you individually and for you both as funders. What are your reflections on leadership in this moment for funders when leaders themselves are exhausted? Sally, let's start with you on this one.
Well, I think it's important that we try, as hard as it might be, to focus on what little positive there is out there. I mean, vaccines are available and accessible in the United States, and more people are getting them every day. We're finally getting to the point, even in Texas, where the latest surge is waning. As funders, as grant makers, we get to do some pretty rewarding work. I try to focus on the amazing stories that I hear about of recovery from our grantees, and I share those stories with our team and with our donors so they can bask in that reward too. I love what I do, and when I hear those stories, that's my focus. That's where we can invest our time. Just look at what we're able to do. Look at the great good our donors, investors in our work have allowed us to do. And I always encourage taking time when it's needed, right? To my staff, to each other, to my colleagues, mask up, take precautions, but engage safely, but engage, because connecting with people is what inspires me. And I think it's what inspires most of us. We have to do what's best for our physical health for sure. But part of that is taking care of ourselves mentally too. And that personal social interaction is key to our overall health. And of course, if you need support, seek it. Don't be afraid to seek that help. We have grantees that have resources that are available to the public, to everybody. NAMI's on this call because I wanted to make sure they were here. seek the support you need if you need it. There are resources out there, find them, use them, take care of you.
Thanks, Sally. Anne, your thoughts on this?
Well, I appreciate what Sally just said, and so I'll try and say a few different things because she's so good at this. I want to say one thing, which is that one of the good things about COVID is that Zoom actually allows for some connections that we didn't have, and so we started having a Monday morning staff meeting, 9 a.m. Monday morning, for 15 or 30 minutes, just to make announcements and to sort of connect with everybody. And I end every single one of those Monday morning meetings with what we now call the triumvirate, which is, I say every single Monday morning, take care of yourself first, take care of your loved ones second, and work comes third, and it's the most flexible. And I say that every single Monday morning, and I really hope that our staff really takes that into consideration. A couple of other thoughts that I've had is that I'm in my position now for 8 years, and I've recently realized that every single year that I've been here, we've had a disaster to deal with. We had a mass shooting on our community college campus in 2015. We've had floods. We had what we called Snowmageddon, which was 3 feet of snow, where some rural communities were without power for 3 months. And then, as I said, the worst wildfires in Oregon's history. So I'm finally getting the point that we have to sort of build in a strategy for coping with emergencies, because they're going to keep happening every single year. And rather than each year sort of having this one-off ad hoc response, we have to actually build in our budget every year an allocation for emergency response. We have to have a staffing strategy for how we're going to respond and who it's going to be, rather than just pulling people, as I say, in this kind of ad hoc way, and have emergency authority already from our board to respond. So that's one thing that has been on my mind. A second thing that's been on my mind is that I'm really clear that our foundation's investment in community building, which is a key part of who we are, has been critical. So community building means we invest in leadership development and communities coming together to collaborate, develop a vision for their future, develop plans, implement those plans, and so on, to improve well-being. And normally we think about our investments in community building as a sort of looking toward the positive, building a brighter future. But it's been very clear to me that that investment has been really key to resilience building and preparedness for dealing with adversity. So it's people have the relationships to come together that can be mobilized right away. They have relationships with key partners. Jim White, who is on this call as the head of the Nonprofit Association of Oregon, is just in touch with everybody, because we have this community building spirit that has relationships that can be mobilized all the time. But I'm going to end on sort of a less optimistic note, which is, I think it has really caused us and me to really confront some really deep existential questions about what it means to be a philanthropy in this day and age. I mean, we think of ourselves as a strategic philanthropy that's trying to achieve outcomes for kids and families and communities. Well, what does that really mean when we're living in a world of emergencies? Or what does it mean to be a grant maker and have flexible philanthropic dollars when so many of our local institutions are scrambling to write proposals for the huge amount of public relief money that's out there right now? Or what does it mean to do community building when we can't even go to our communities, when they're dealing with COVID and fires and they're being torn apart by political polarization? I mean, we're a scholarship provider. What does it mean when higher ed is dealing with COVID and all the students are frazzled? So I have to say that this is a moment where I've really taken a step back and said, wow, what is philanthropy in this? What does it mean to be a philanthropy in this day and age? So the last thing I want to say is, I think that it's really important to learn from our experiences, and we did a lot of a lessons learned document from our mass shooting on our community college campus, and I wonder, Sarah, if you can drop that into the chat just so people can have it. So I'm going to end on that depressing note. Sorry, Miriam.
Well, I don't know if it's depressing, Anne, but it's a good example of leadership. Leadership in this moment and thinking about the future. But you also said that that it's important to learn from our experiences, and the people on this call have all been grappling with everything that Anne, you and Sally have been talking about. and have been figuring out the self-care, the organizational self-care strategies in their own organizations, in their own lives, in their own roles. And so I want to invite people to share in the chat, to drop your own reflections on this and thoughts that you have about taking care of yourselves, your organizations, your communities. We often find that what people drop into the chat is really insightful and helps all of us learn. So let's crowdsource some of those really good ideas. Now, Anne, I don't know whether you were intentionally introducing the next topic I'm going to ask Sally about, but Sally, CDP literally wrote the book, or the playbook, on explaining how philanthropy can respond to disasters, providing immediate relief, planning for the longer term, rebuilding, preparedness efforts, resilience. So how can the disaster philanthropy playbook inform the efforts of funders as they work to respond to the current disasters, including the trauma that these disasters are causing for everybody, but especially those who are most directly affected by the disasters?
So first, a little explainer about what that is. It's linked in the chat now. The Disaster Philanthropy Playbook is it's a compilation of philanthropic strategies, promising practices and lessons learned that help communities be better prepared when a disaster strikes. In particular, it's aimed at helping philanthropic organizations and individual donors be more strategic with their investments and recognize the importance of supporting long-term recovery for marginalized populations. We like to say every funder is a disaster funder. I think Anne kind of articulated that really well there. The playbook, it's a go-to resource, not just for funders though, but for communities, government leaders, anyone really. It's free, it's interactive, and it provides ways to develop strategies around specific issue areas affected by disaster, like education, like housing, legal services, and of course, mental health, grief, and bereavement. It also includes impact stories, examples of best practices in disaster recovery, not just from our grant making, but from grant making from other funders. And there are tons of resources, including a toolkit that for mental health, grief, and bereavement. So there's a toolkit there ready for you to use. We share there and other places on our website, including in a blog that I recently wrote about our own funding in the mental health, trauma, and informed care area of recovery. Sarah, you can post the link to that blog there in the chat. We've been funding this space for years, and all of our funding, through all of our funding mechanisms, not just our COVID fund, but through all of our disaster funds that we have available. And we have many go-to partners for that, including NAMI, who is on this call today. The intersection of mental health and disasters is one of the more culturally sensitive aspects of response and recovery work, and one of the least funded among philanthropic disaster investments. We would love to see that change. And again, walk the talk with our COVID fund by granting to organizations like Vibrant Emotional Health. Vibrant administers the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the NFL Lifeline, NYC Well, and other crisis and intervention services across the country. And we funded NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, who you'll hear from in a little while, as they've provided critical resources, including for frontline workers who are being tested to the max right now. But we engaged in this type of funding work long before COVID, like I said. And when I oversaw the Hurricane Harvey Recovery Fund, we funded Mental Health America Houston to help address hoarding issues our rebuild and repair organizations were encountering with their clients, and to support students and teachers and communities most affected by that storm as they return to the classroom. Supporting mental health helps heal a community after a disaster. Trauma, particularly the layered trauma that we're experiencing these days, must be addressed for us to experience complete and holistic recovery from any disaster, including this pandemic.
Thanks, Sally. And that's a perfect segue. I'd like to welcome Katrina into the conversation now. As Sally has mentioned, Katrina, you're with NAMI, and I think you are able to share with us some of your thoughts about how NAMI has responded to the recent disasters, how you're working to try to promote really a trauma-informed approach as communities respond across the country. So what are some of the resources that you might lift up to share with those in this network, in the GLR network, to support their efforts to advance trauma-informed responses?
Thank you. Thank you for having us. This is such an important conversation. And I was sharing in the conversation before the lock of this run of show with Sarah, that our work in disasters as NAMI really began during Hurricane Katrina 20 years ago. And I happened to be the communications and public affairs director at the time, and had just come out of the policy kind of public policy camp as well, and spent a lot of time there. And in looking back, I think that's a really important moment for all of us to understand. Before that moment, we really saw disasters sort of and the magnitude of the impact on such large portions of everyone as being kind of outside of our country in many ways. We really didn't understand that disasters do affect Americans and affect all of our communities and have a big global impact. From there to where we are now, of course, we've seen much more, and we'll continue to see a rise in environmental disasters and climate disasters. I prefer to call them climate disasters, political upheaval, health issues, societal disasters, all kinds of things going on, and they all have an impact on people, and we're beginning to understand more. Part of what's so key about trauma is that it's important for us to know we're continuing to learn a lot about trauma and what appropriate responses are for people in trauma. And I think that this pandemic has, in a very sad and unfortunate way, because it's affected everyone and everyone differently, we now have some understanding of kind of what that can be. So before I begin to talk about what we're doing, I'll just define trauma for the group so that we know really what it means. It's an emotional response, but it also has physical and biological impacts on some. So everyone affects everyone differently, but what you can expect in terms of what you see are the things we've sort of been talking about on this call: exhaustion, confusion, anxiety, disassociation, and a variety of other kind of responses. NAMI just completed a mood disorder survey that we did from spring to now. It was a replica of one we'd done in 2009. So we had a real nice baseline around mood disorders, including depression. And because of the pandemic, we added a lot more in there, and we're able to go down different avenues for youth, for people of color, for frontline workers, et cetera. And the picture it paints is really, really stark. People are just so many people are impacted and affected. So really, we know this has a short term, but we also know this has a long-term impact. So I think it's important that as NAMI, we're looking to address the short term right now and also looking ahead to the long term. So to answer the question, what are we doing around this? NAMI is the lived experience. That's our persona. We're individuals and families and friends of people who've lived with mental health conditions and have been on our journey. We like to say we're speaking from our scars, not from our open wounds. So we're somewhat in our recovery that we can now reflect back. And a big, huge, important part of all people who've had a mental health struggle is giving back to someone else. That's part of your own healing journey. So NAMI kind of has this cycle of pay it forward, pay it back, and it kind of continues on and on. So really the most important thing that we know from that, and this is now transferable across this current sort of period of epic kind of nationwide global trauma, is hope. So hope is the most important thing that we can convey to ourselves and to one another. So it lets us know, we're not alone. We're not alone in this struggle, because all of those feelings of exhaustion, confusion, anxiety, disassociation, all of those trauma responses can really kind of further sort of magnify the impact of that sense of isolation and loneliness and of being alone and being hopeless. So giving hope is really important. We do that through really a few things. We make sure that people, first of all, know that they're not alone. So being a welcoming place for them to kind of come in. Our helpline has now gone to 12 hours. It's 10 to 10. And continues to take chat and text calls around the clock and messages that are always returned. That has expanded tremendously during this time because people, and the data says people are calling, really looking and seeking just that real simple hope and help. Just give me something, give me a lifeline. Also, our support is crucial during this period of time. So we have more than 600 local affiliates across the country, and they provide no cost support for families, for individuals, and then there are an array of support initiatives that go on to help the community. And that's just an important resource for people to know that they're there. Also educating people, helping them know what resources are there. There was a mention of sort of a fragmented system. I don't think there is any system in America more fragmented than the mental health care system. And it's really telling now when people, even if you have money, even if you have wherewithal, you simply cannot navigate mental health services in many, many communities. If you are a young person or a person of color, everything is multiplied and magnified. So the barriers, the impact, the situation on you is much greater. So NAMI is there. I know they put up in the chat box our COVID guide, which is really intense. We update that regularly. In there is a lot of information on all of the different aspects that we're talking about today. Where do I go where can I go here? If I'm a teacher, what can I do? All the different aspects of how we can equip ourselves, not only in our own recovery from our own trauma experience and build and try to instill a sense of resiliency, but also in conveying that to the people that we serve, either through our philanthropy or through our great charitable work or just at home to our family and friends.
Thanks, Katrina. I look forward to really digging into those resources that Sarah's been posting. You've offered, I think, some tips about what helps people cope and what helps people find support. I'm wondering if you have some additional thoughts about how members of this network might integrate mental health and wellness informed approaches into our responses to disasters.
Yes, and thank you for that question. You know, we have a lot of partners. Many of them are Fortune 500 corporate partners, and I've led that effort in our strategic partnerships, and I will say I've been busier this year, and there has been a shift. I'm talking to C-suites and CEOs about exactly the topics we were talking about earlier. How do we support our own staff? How do we keep the work going? So this really has impact around us in our daily lives and in our family and friends and our social circle and ourselves, but also throughout our work. So I think there's 3 things that we can all do to make sure that we're understanding and recognizing this. And the first is just what we're doing now, seeing it and recognizing this is real, recognizing that there's a mental health component to every single disaster and that trauma is real and that it affects people in different ways. So just kind of seeing that and being willing to look at it and talk about it is really important. And it may seem real simple, but this is a topic that many people haven't really openly talked about. The history of stigma and stereotypes extends, but we're beginning to kind of see a huge breakdown of that. The second is learn. So leaning in to learn a little bit more about trauma, about how it affects different people. I cannot underscore enough how important it is to learn how it affects children and youth. That will have a much longer tail, the data tells us. This will have a very long-term impact on us for our future, and we owe it to our future and to our children. Also, people of color. Many of them are dealing with different types of trauma, including racial trauma that compound when these other things happen, access and competent care and cultural issues are really tremendous within these communities and can have a much bigger impact. So learning about how these, how trauma affects people, how it affects us, and what are some tips that we can do. There are many, many things that we can do all across the NAMI website. I'm happy to even share more around work, around if you're frontline workers, if you're teachers, what can you do? We have lots of resources. And the last is really important. So for all of you on here who are in philanthropy, who've done movement building, we know that if there isn't an action, the learning doesn't imprint. We can be told over and over, eat your fruits and vegetables. But if there isn't a real action around that, the knowledge of what is best for us and the practice of what we do does not actually imprint to make a change. So I encourage us all on this call and to our networks and friends to look at taking some action. It can be very small. It can be posting for World Mental Health Day this Sunday. It can be just sharing and acknowledging in our social spaces or within our communities some small way, or it can be very, very large, like making a gift to mental health organizations that are doing this important work, partnerships, learning from one another, and then taking that extra action will really make a difference. So just to repeat, see, learn, and take action.
Thanks, Katrina. That's really helpful. I think applies to many situations, but certainly to this disaster situation. And I did not know it was Mental Health Day on Sunday. So thank you for calling that out. I think that's very, very, very timely. Now I'd like to turn the focus back to Oregon. And I'd like to welcome Laura and Jim into the conversation to share their experience. Starting with you, Laura, can you tell us about the communities that you're working in? What's been the impact of COVID-19 and other recent disasters on those communities, the ones that you're really focused on?
Thank you. Good day. Thank you for having us. And going back to what our colleagues and leaders shared before, I'm not going to go and go deeper on that because, you know, Anne already talked about it, some of the issues that we've been facing, but I'm going to talk about stories that I've been picking up and the work that I do. I've been working in the farm worker and marginalized communities for over 25 years. And our people always, it never goes pretty far. You know, our people felt defeated before we even started, you know, and our leadership have been challenged by many issues. In my role as the Spanish speaking and, you know, field coordinator in the Oregon and Siskiyou County and the north part of California, not only having the challenges to go into communities, you know, because we're remote and, you know, because of COVID, having information in different languages has been a must. You know, many of the information about COVID has been in English and Spanish, and we have remote communities with pockets of new communities from Central and South America, and some of them speak Quiché, and some of them speak you know, other languages, perhaps, and it was a big challenge, you know, just to be there and not being able to provide some of the vital information, you know, for this community. So we have been working in the network so we could overcome these challenges by providing groups with information, with the right information, facts about what's COVID. So therefore, in our rural and remote areas, as you have seen in the news, COVID cases have been very high in these communities. Entire packing companies being affected by and infected with COVID. Others being remote, isolated, and farm worker communities. Entire groups and families have been infected and affected by, and now they have been losing family members. Farm owners, as Anne mentioned, been polarizing and polarizing the information and making it so political instead of a health issue. So this group have been also affected, um, but having resources that our poor and marginalized communities don't have. Those are the sadly, our communities just sadly die. And then Anne also mentioned that last year we also not only were dealing with COVID, but one of the largest fire in our communities in Oregon. So communities were dealing with COVID, and then the disaster of losing their homes, because of the wildfires. Money, that was a big one, to keep their homes, up, or money that many of these communities kept in their homes, cash, to survive every day, because some of us don't believe in banks. And so with the wildfires, family were relocated and they're still out there in hotels. Many times these areas are surrounded with vandalism and drugs. And their kids paying the consequences of being technically incarcerated for the, and unless you go to school, you will not be at the hotel. But if you're not in school, because we were having virtual classes, kids will be 24 hours in the hotels, right? And others that were relocated away, like from their own communities, relocated like 2 hours from their own school districts and their own areas, going and riding buses for about 2 hours one way. Our kids, being affected by soil their pants, of course, their kids, and then being bullied from their classmates and suffering from long rides and being tied down to their former school districts. So those are the areas that I have seen that have been most affected by. And this is not scientific, because this is what I'm seeing and what I'm speaking from my heart, from the communities that I have served. So not only being blocked from receiving the right information, but also because of many of our communities have been immigrated and many times undocumented, they don't qualify for the right resources. So families are still, as we speak, they're still remote areas, they're still relocated and being in hotels. So that not only affects the mental stability, but also the nutrition stability. Some of these communities and families are affected by other illnesses, not only mental health, but other physical illnesses, which makes it harder, right, to access the right food or to access resources. And so that's what I could say about just going into a little deeper what Anne and Sally and Katrina just spoke about. Thank you. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Laura. That's exactly, I think, the perspective that we were hoping we would hear from you, really what you're seeing and hearing from the communities that you're so connected to. I wondered if you had some additional thoughts on the emotional impact. Anne and Sally and Katrina have all talked about not only the physical challenges of coping with disaster upon disaster upon disaster, but also the emotional challenges. And I wonder if you have some additional thoughts about that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Miriam. Well, our communities deal with the political, and power dynamics. This is a powerful reality, and it's not only the trauma that you bring in when you're moving in from other countries, but also the trauma that you've been facing with as soon as you move into a new country with a new culture, and then having to deal with, feeling powerless, and then having a boss that is paying your salary or your daily routines, your work, and have to listen to them, to what's going on. People feel lack of power, lack of services, and lack of information. Farm workers and low-income communities suffer from not having resources or information, but also farm owners having to be politicizing the health thing, as I was saying before, and have done zero efforts to bring resources to these communities. So that's very sad. All this has been hard in our communities because it takes double or triple overwhelming, in terms of the emotional, personal, and economically effects. Stress level are high in children and parents, as Sally and Katrina and Anne was saying, by being tied down, right? Not having enough to give to your children. And that's why, many times that's how we immigrated, because we want to give our children best lives than what we had in our country. So the stress level are magnifying at this moment. Many times, in many cases, there aren't bilingual and bicultural resources, mental resources. Katrina specified very clearly when she says racial mental health. What does that mean to us? In many of our cases is like, no, we're not crazy. No, we're not suffering from mental breakdown. We're just nervous. We're just overwhelming with everything that's going on. So we don't call it because we're afraid to be labeled, as crazy or as any other labels that many of our communities have been labeled and suffer from. These communities have been faced with many other challenges, not only lack of money, but also lack of resources. During wildfires, many of our families still looking for resources, and many of them don't qualify for many other reasons. And one of them is that mental health is not that they don't qualify, but they don't have somebody close by to relate to and to get access to, and then afraid of being labeled. Many of our communities didn't even have the right equipment to receive the fire and alarm warnings. First of all, we don't have the equipment, the smartphones, and the other one was the language barrier, and that repeats every day and repeats it every single time. The language, the equipment, the access. So Anne made a really good point about, we are field coordinators, we are building communities. How do you build communities when there's no access to broadband or internet access for these families, including equipment to do a virtual class? So what you rely on is that you have leaders in those communities. Those leaders are reaching out to us, or we are reaching in for them to have the proper information, to have the proper resources to help out with the magnifying disasters. It's not only a disaster outside, but it's also a disaster in the middle of our house, in the middle of our homes.
Laura, thank you so much. I think you remind us about how many layers there are to disaster upon disaster upon disaster, and the experiences that people bring into the various situations that we're facing. I think your stories are really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to stay in Oregon, but now turn to Jim. Jim, from your perspective at the Nonprofit Association of Oregon, I suspect that you have some thoughts about the roles that philanthropy may be well suited to play in disasters, how you've seen that play out in Oregon's recent wildfires, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here today. I think it's important for us, I appreciate so much of what's already been shared, and I think it's important for us to understand the capacities that government have to respond in a timely manner. Oftentimes, government obviously has a major jurisdictional requirement to respond in disasters, and yet they're often challenged in their own planning and challenged in their response. And so what often happens it's the groups that Lara was just talking about, these community-based organizations, these nonprofits who are coming together and putting immediate solves on the issue. And that's happened all through the pandemic, all through what's been happening here, certainly in Oregon and across the country with sort of a racial awakening and justice movement. And as we saw the wildfires and the heat dome event, I don't want to leave out here that Oregon experienced a toll of death of over 100 people in June. That is more than all the people who've been killed in the entire hurricane season this year on the east and south of the United States. So these issues of how government can respond and what they do and the time frame it takes them to respond creates, it's a place where I believe all of us as sort of private organizations who do public good, right? That's what the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors are. That we can step into some of the gaps that are created and help to close those, both immediate term, but also longer term through our own advocacy and our pushing on government a little bit to help close these gaps themselves. We did a study back in 20.
Jim, you've muted yourself.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. Trying to put the study in there. We did a study back in 2018 to look at disaster preparedness in Oregon. This has been an issue that's been near and dear to our heart. And we recognize that and I want to introduce some terminology here too. People were talking about layers and layers of disasters. Well, sort of in disaster doctrine, that's called chronic disasters. And when you layer chronic disasters with an immediate disaster, you can have what's called a complex emergency, right? And so we have already in many of our communities in Oregon, a housing and homelessness crisis, a behavioral health and general health capacity and support crisis happening. And so when you combine these types of events, as Laura was mentioning, as Katrina was mentioning around behavioral health, you'll see that the resilience of these community-based organizations and the nonprofits that are responding finally hits a wall. Back in June, when it was starting to be safe to go back out and meet with people, we did a couple of focus groups around the state, and resilience became almost a dirty word. In fact, I had some nonprofit leaders saying, stop using that term, because then the government and foundations think they can pack more on top of us. We're not resilient anymore. This, as one person put it, this hefty bag has now reached its capacity and burst. And so when we've got community leaders like in those types of situations, I think there's an enormous opportunity there for philanthropy to help lead in, again, that gap that I think happens, unfortunately, when government is moving in its own pace. And in my opinion, a little bit too slowly sometimes. There's also, I think, a huge role that philanthropy can play in mobilizing community. Again, as Laura was just talking about, in her role as a community-based person, a community-based organizer, we in the nonprofit sector and philanthropy know the people and the organizations that are responding in disasters and are moving things forward in many ways better than even local governments do. And when we look at the approaches that government often takes post-disaster for recovery, it's built in systems that probably need some refinement, let's say, that don't necessarily meet where community is and the opportunity that's presented through nonprofits and philanthropy to help support the community in a more effective way. I would sort of, ask the participants to kind of think of like a county board meeting on any kind of a topic, land use or whatever it is. It's classically, city planners do stuff, they put stuff together, And then you have what I call open mic night, where people come together and they put forward their ideas about that particular topic, whether it's city planning, whether it's a school board meeting, whatever it is. That's not community engagement, right? That's sort of a de facto feedback system after you've already decided more or less what you're going to do. There's enormous opportunity here for philanthropy to play a role and use the power that you have with government to help create an opportunity for these community-based organizations and your grantees that you fund who know these communities and who can help to engage them and bring them into the conversation, so that the planning is done in such a way that it meets community where they are and it's supporting the real needs that they have. There's a truism in disasters. The quickest way to gentrify an area is to destroy it, right? Then city planners can bring out the blueprint that they've been kind of hatching in the back of their mind for 20 years, like, oh, here's my opportunity to do the things I wanted to do. Well, that's going to force the low income people, the people who've been marginalized by society due to racial or other oppressions, it's going to push them to the side and not have them come back into the community. And so philanthropy, I think, can play a huge role there. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate your reminder that philanthropy has a microphone and can hold the microphone or hand it to people whose voices often are not heard or are discounted. Now, I suspect that people listening to your comments note that you come to the current set of crises with previous experience responding to international humanitarian crises at Mercy Corps and other organizations. So that gives you a particular vantage point. Given that, what do you see as some of the most pressing needs for the system of disaster response in the US, with a particular focus on economically disadvantaged kids and families and communities? Is there some low-hanging fruit that foundations and nonprofits could start to pick to ensure a better response and recovery from disasters?
Yeah, thanks. I think first and foremost, the lowest hanging fruit is, sort of heal thyself. Be ready. Have what's called a COOP plan, right? A contingency of operations plan for your nonprofit, for your foundation. Have formal and informal, if necessary, relationships with each other to sort of pass the baton, if necessary, for your operations in the case that you're not actually able to operate for a period of time. We saw a pretty rapid response here in Oregon, where a group of foundations came together to set up a community rebuilding fund for the wildfires, for the Labor Day fires, and I included the Ford Family Foundation and others. That was a hugely important moment. I think Sally can attest that, one of the biggest important things you need to do in the front of an end of an emergency is you've got to use the attention that national media puts on these to actually get some donations so that you can use those over the period of the recovery time frame, because eventually a new disaster will come along and people will not be spending as much time thinking about the disaster that you have in front of you. So having that donate button up early is actually really important, and being responsive in that way. But again, first and foremost, I think, get ready, be ready. When we did this study back in 2018, the number one issue that everybody was concerned about, and it still hasn't happened yet, is what we call the Cascadia subduction zone event, the 9.0 or higher earthquake that we are overdue for in the Pacific Northwest. That will be as big or bigger than what happened in Japan a number of years ago, and is known already. Don't want to frighten anybody, but don't go on YouTube and look up, Cascadia, Multnomah County. All the bridges come down. It's not going to be a very pretty event. And so having your own contingency of operating plans, having your own phone tree or message tree if there's no phone system? How will philanthropy put money out if there's no banking and internet, right? So start thinking about what kinds of primary, alternate, contingency, and even emergency systems do you have in place to continue your mission at a time when community is going to need you all most?
Those are excellent tips, Jim, and born of a lot of deep experience, I know. Before we transition to Q&A, I'd like to welcome Ann and Sally back. You guys were our openers. We've heard a lot of really insightful comments and poignant stories in between. So I'd like to give you guys a chance, Ann and Sally, to come back and share any additional quick reflections on the conversation up to this point. Any additional thoughts to share? And Sally, I see your camera on first, so let's go to you first.
Tag I meant, right? I took a lot of notes and hopefully kind of brought them down to some key thoughts. Consider the long term. I mean, this is something we scream out loud all the time with our megaphone at Center for Disaster Philanthropy. Disasters, recovery from them, this pandemic is proof. They last a long time, and recovery lasts a long time. And we need to, as funders, consider that long-term recovery, that mid to long-term recovery. Most donors give dollars immediately, and a lot of times those dollars are depleted, and there's not room for supporting mental health recovery from a disaster. So think long-term, think longer. Remember that every funder is a disaster funder. If you fund in education, healthcare, whatever issue topic that you fund in, those things are the things that are most disproportionately affected by disasters. So consider that. Remember and have your plan, like Jim said. Be prepared to support recovery in the communities where you fund. There will not be full recovery from any disaster until we address the trauma that these disasters cause. We won't fully recover from anything until that's addressed. Consider funding rural, immigrant, refugee, indigenous communities, those without resources or access to them. Provide them some resources. Help them get access to the resources that are available. Lift up what is available. So lift it up, make sure it's out there. Present that information. Help destigmatize accessing those resources. So talk about World Mental Health Day, put that message out there. One of the great things things that funders have is an opportunity to connect to one another and to connect other people. We're networkers, we're conveners. So use that power to advocate for more, right? So I think those are the things that we need to talk about. Those are the notes that I took anyway.
Thanks, Sally. You're an excellent note taker. Anne, some additional reflections from you.
Yeah, thanks. I think one of the things that I want to go back to is this notion of trauma and being trauma informed and developing capacity to respond to the trauma that people are feeling. And I think, fortunately, I sort of feel like the notion of trauma-informed practice in so much of the work that we've been doing over the last 10 years has sort of become more and more the norm. It's accepted, it's not considered sort of marginal. And so we as a foundation have been supporting trauma-informed practice in schools, for among youth programs and so on. And so there's kind of a base of knowledge about it, although in rural parts of the state, there are very few resources. I mean, we live in Southwest Oregon. We don't have one child psychiatrist, so, but can I call on Laura to share a little bit about what we did in terms of the promotores and helping them to learn be trained in trauma-informed practice?
Laura just tested. There you go. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Sally. We have done a statewide networking. We call working teams. So we started the first one in 2019. The first one in the history the foundation, Spanish-speaking networking for in the entire or statewide group, which it's been divided in subgroups so we could tackle right information. We can bring information to our constituency around the state, including California, which is kind of tricky because California has different guidelines and stuff. So we have to be conscious about the fact that we cannot promote what is going on in Oregon, and sometimes it promotes and it gets it's pretty good. But then the other thing that we were ahead of the curve is that we were working with the farm worker community in town, and they not only became good neighbors, they became good leaders, and then therefore they were looking for more information, for more what to do in their communities. So they became promotoras, and that model has been pretty familiar with many of us. And they were not health like promoters, but they were resident services promoters. They were ahead of the curve when COVID hit. They were well equipped, not only mentally, physically, but also the local health authority helped us equip them to go and knock on doors, to go and take information. The last part with the promotoras is that with the group of mental health providers in the area, they're tackling the mental health and the lack of services by having conversational groups, with promotoras. The promotoras are not consulting. They're just, having a conversation and having someone there to facilitate the area. So for us, that was a big head, having promotoras already in place and having to deal with one of the doctors here to do mental health for the local communities, having boots on the ground. And then the part that really gives me goosebumps is that these communities already knows us. They already know the foundation. They have somebody from the foundation linked to them, and they were very quick served. Thanks to Anne and the entire board that quickly got together and said, we're gonna respond to these communities quick. So money didn't go around the bush. Money went directly to the organization. So for us, that was something that really create not only a self of belonging, or self of relationship, but also a safety, because they can go safely into our community foundation, or the For Family Foundation community liaison, which I call myself, or a branch or an arm of the foundation outside the foundation. So that was, that's what I wanted to add, because it was fabulous just to see the community responding. They were not shy, but they were family. They were friends of us. So thank you, Anne, for allowing me to speak about that. It gives me goosebumps.
Thanks, Laura. I really appreciate that, because I think that Jim's point about connecting people, connecting communities to government, those kinds of connections are really the kinds of things that we as Foundation can play. We have so many relationships. We have so many links. I mean, we have best friends in every single rural town in Oregon as a result of our leadership development programs, our scholarship programs, our grants. And so it's making those connections between the communities, and especially the marginalized communities that Laura was talking about, and the government resources, which aren't, as Jim pointed out, really well managed to weave together well. And then this notion, I know we all know this, but I just want to raise it again. The attention is on these communities at the moment that the disaster happens, and then the attention goes away. And Laura was describing about how there are families in Southern Oregon that have been living in motels for a year, and their kids are taking 2-hour bus rides to school. I mean, that is just horrific. And somehow we have to keep the attention on the disaster, and keep the attention on the needy people, and not just at the individual level, but at the community level as well, because we can organize at the community level, whereas a lot of the resources really end up going to individuals. So there's a lot of work before us, but I think we're all feeling proud of what we have been able to accomplish so far.
Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists, and as I hand the baton back to Sarah, and invite all of our participants to join in the conversation in some Q&A.
I will just second what Miriam just said. Thank you to all of our panelists. This was a really thoughtful question, so much rich advice and resources shared. So thank you all for that. So as I think I mentioned at the opening, this is a little bit of this is a special session, Funder to Funder conversation. So if any attendees are interested in raising your hand and letting us know, our producer will keep an eye open if you'd like to share your own reflections or verbally express a question or a comment with the panel. We'd invite you to go ahead and do that as well. In the meantime, I will share one of the questions that came into the Q&A box, asking how those on the panel are funding or working with schools and other community-based organizations to support some of those social, emotional well-being and mental health resources or approaches for youth in these communities, recognizing, the incredible ways that they've been impacted, talking about living in motels for over a year and long bus rides. But there's stories like that all over across the state, I'm sure, and across the country. So what are ways, or what are some of the opportunities to make an impact, funders and nonprofits for these communities in that situation? Katrina, I noticed you unmuted first.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and just share what we're doing around this community. As I mentioned before, the youth are more impacted than anyone, and this has what they call a long tail. We have several programs, and through our affiliate network, we have connections in communities all across the country. So I think that's one of the things that makes NAMI unique, is that we're this national organization, but we have this grassroots. One of the programs we deliver is called Ending the Silence, and it is a program for schools, and it's targeted at students, educators, and parents. So there's 3 different components to it. And in that is a lot of information about learning and knowing and encouraging those conversations and that knowledge transfer. And once again, really offering that beacon of hope. Also, in addition to this, we have quite a bit happening in the youth space itself. In terms of content and targeted kind of outreach to them. We launched an entire website section for youth right before school started. The school season started for some and many, and that continues to grow. And we use our social channels, a lot of our ambassadors and influencers, to continue to help kind of promote and encourage those conversations and modeling and role modeling. And finally, we will be engaging with our partners and some of our media partners in some really huge events coming up later this fall and at the beginning of next year, to really convene youth, to listen to them themselves and let us hear from them before we think that what we're doing for them is really beneficial. We want to be able to create those kind of environments to empower their voice.
I love that reflection, the importance of listening to them to understand what are their needs, their interests, the opportunities, and how to respond directly to that. Anyone else want to weigh in on this question? And it looks like.
Yeah, as I said, we work in rural parts of Oregon and Northern California. And I just want to reiterate what Katrina said earlier, that if you want to look at one system that's really broken, it's the mental health system and it's the behavioral health system. And so what we have been trying to do just in it, even over the last several years, is just trying to build up the behavioral health system in our home county, because the providers weren't even in touch with each other, didn't know, weren't coming together to sort of take a look at the community as a whole, what kind of resources were there, what holes there were, how we could better coordinate. And just, I think that the big lesson that I sort of hear from everybody here is if you have a dysfunctional system in place already, when a disaster strikes, it's impossible. And so the more that this shines a light, all of these disasters shine light on the need for us to build the capacity of our behavioral health and mental health systems. That is all to the good, because then they'll be there when we need them. And we've been doing it with our schools and with our youth development programs and so on. And it's become more, trauma informed is some language that people now know. And they didn't know it 5 or 10 years ago, or they thought it was something that was really marginal. And so I think that kind of thing really gives me hope that we're shining more light on this and trying to develop the capacity of the systems so that they're there when we need them and when we need to call on them in times of disaster.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like access, to these resources is a huge hurdle. Building a system that provides access, especially in harder to reach and more rural communities.
I would say that one of the things that we've funded over the years is training for teachers to understand and be engaged in trauma-informed care, mental health first aid, any opportunity for them to learn how to respond to the behavior of their students. So one of the things that we've done over the years is train in that, especially in a community that's been affected by a disaster. I think that's really critical, that we need to get those resources in the hands of people who can use them. So our COVID fund has been a global fund, so we've had to fund at a national, international, regional level. But one of the ways we've reached teachers and students directly in local communities is Donors Choose. We funded a match on Donors Choose. So that the teachers can come and say, hey, this is something we need. And part of an awful lot of what they've requested has been resources for how to deal with the trauma that the students have affected the students that they have in their classrooms. So, any way that we can funnel those resources to the ground, to as close to the ground and to those who need them, and so that they have access to them, I think that is the critical role that philanthropy can play. What are the gaps? Where can we fill those gaps and get them as close to the ground and useful for those who need them as possible?
I love that example. That's a really innovative way of really, again, getting back to hearing from the people themselves about what they need and finding a way to close the gap and respond to that need. Jim or Laura, would you have anything to add?
Laura, did you want to go? Okay. Yeah, I think that to kind of echo a little bit what Ann just said around, using the power that you have as philanthropy to be conveners. And I would hope that maybe you can even step a little bit closer into advocating with government to recondition and refine some of the systems. There's a lot that can be learned. I know there will be a lot of learning here in Oregon. It really only matters if you learn from both your successes and your mistakes. And it's very hard for any of us as individuals to admit, where we've done something wrong. I think it's especially hard for government to admit when they do stuff wrong. And so the ability for philanthropy to convene, maybe even in some closed door sessions, so that government can hear it in a way that doesn't feel as combative and as, putting them on the hot seat. But we've got to fix some of these systems. Ann mentions, the behavioral health system and what's happening in Douglas County. We should remember that in 2014, the Douglas County Health Department basically collapsed and had to be taken over by nonprofits. There is no health department from the county or state side in Douglas County. Nonprofits had to step forward, and philanthropy had to then help support that with public dollars as well. But there's huge gaps already in the mosaic, in the quilt that is our health and human service support system in America and in Oregon particularly. That is where I think philanthropy has to start pushing back into government, like, hey, this is your jurisdictional responsibility. We need you to take it up.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ann and Sally. One of the things that I'm so impressed with with our foundation is that have actually people from the community on the ground. So I'm from the community. I've been working with this community for 20 plus years, 25 years in the community. So it's not that I know the community like very well or I'm the only one, but it was so important, for someone in the community to know someone that it looks like them and that speaks the language and that I'm related, to the issues that goes on in our small or rural communities. So having the people uh, at the table where decisions are making, and for us is the working team, making decisions for the work that we do in the communities. That's bringing um, work, not only working with the community, but working for the community, but also working with the community, right? And so anything for the community without the community. So we're doing that. And when we talk about DEI and we're talking about all these issues that raise up, I'm always saying, equity, I'm walking on the equity shoes, right? We're breaking barriers for those communities to come, for our communities to come to the table, not only providing transportation, but also providing meals, providing removing the barriers that most likely farm workers or low income will face and will not come to those tables of decision. So for us, having someone like me in the community, the people relate to me, is so critical. So when we're talking racial equity, when we're talking about uh, equity in general, I'm always saying I'm walking in those shoes. I feel like I'm the equity piece of the foundation. I think all the field coordinators, we are the part of the equity in action in our communities. Removing barriers so those of us that live in rural have a voice at that table. And not only at any table, we're at the decision table and advocating for our own communities with our voices. We're not having that foundation coming in and talking for us. We're at those tables where we're advocating for our communities, having promotoras to advocate for themselves nationally, not only locally. So I can go on for hours, but yeah. So thank you.
No, that's really important to lift up. I mean, I think one of the lessons learned that I'm hearing both from you and from Ann is the importance of those early the foundation that was there because of investments in community building in the promotoria that were long before we even were thinking about a pandemic. But that foundation is what enabled, a more effective response and making sure that responses were done in a very equitable way. So I think that's a really key point to lift up. I am noticing that we are coming close to the end of our 90 minutes together. I hope everybody saw that we just posted a poll on your screen that I'd encourage you to just take a couple of quick moments to share your thoughts and feedback with us. We really do use these to help inform our efforts around continuous improvement and making sure that these conversations, the special ones and the normal funder to funder conversations are designed to meet your needs and are responding to the helping to inform your work on the ground. Then quickly, before we go, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our panel. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. I know as all of you have shared the work that you are doing, it's really overwhelming and emotionally exhausting. And I know that you're struggling with that every day. And so I really do appreciate all of you taking the time to join us and share your really insightful thoughts and comments with us. Thank you to Ann Kubish, to Sally Ray, to Katrina Gay, to Laura Isidora, to Jim White, and to my wonderful colleague, Miriam Sharp, for moderating the conversation. I'd like to remind everybody to join in, if possible, again today, talking about the importance of trauma-informed approaches. We'll be having a session later this afternoon from 3 to 4 in partnership with Education Week, as well as the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy at the Atlanta Speech School, that will be looking at trauma-informed practices and how they can form the foundation for the construction of a deep reading brain for children in early learning and early child care programs. And then I hope you'll also make plans to join us again next week when we'll have another double header sessions. We'll start off the day with a Crucible of Practice Salon featuring the Reading Success by Fourth Grade campaign in Springfield, Massachusetts in the 12:30 p.m. Eastern time slot. And then later that afternoon, we will have our partners at Public Broadcasting Service will be co-sponsoring a session featuring several member stations who will be talking about how they're working in partnership with state and local education leaders to support learning both in the classroom in partnership with teachers, as well as in the home in partnership with families. And the following week, we'll host another Funder to Funder conversation, this time with the Overdeck Family Foundation, which will be lifting up how a high dosage tutoring program was an effective strategy for advancing equitable learning recovery in New Jersey. That'll be in the 12:30 p.m. time slot, followed by a session exploring strategies for addressing teacher staffing challenges, something that we've heard from a lot of the communities and states in our coalition, really addressing both substitute teachers as well as regular in classroom teachers in this moment in time. So registration links are posted for all of those sessions in the chat box. I hope you'll register and make plans to join us. Until then, thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.